Welcome to Wellbeing Faces Second Live. I'm joined by the amazing Alexa Zana here today. Welcome, Zana. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good. Very, very good. Very pleased to have you here today. We'll just give it a few moments for people to log in. Hopefully, we are going to be streaming live today to an audience. So if you are here with us, let us know that you're here by sharing a comment, letting me know that you're here with either your name or a quick hello from where you're dialing in from. And you're here from dialing in from Sydney, Alexa.
I'm actually a little north of there. I'm in the Lennox Head, Byron Bay area, so New South Wales, but yeah, right in the north. So yeah, beautiful part of the world.
Amazing. So we'll just give it a few more moments so we can get a heads up. We'll just check that we can be heard and we can be seen. Okay. It's just firing up, I've been told. I get the impression that it sometimes takes there's a little bit of a delay for StreamYard. Have you found that too?
Yeah, I think there's like maybe a 30-second lag between what it's telling us is live and then where other people are actually getting the replay, which is yeah, kind of nice, I suppose. Little buffer.
Exactly. So, what we're really wanting to talk about today is we really want to talk about human-centered leadership, which is a topic that's close to both of our hearts. And today we really want to be sharing some of our knowledge, insights, but just really get some engagement with that conversation, because the term human-centered leadership, it gets bandied around. And when you really ask people, well, what is it? What does it really mean? It's really interesting to hear what their take is. So, Alexis, before we kind of dive in, it would be great to just get an understanding from you. When you think of human-centered leadership, what are the key words that come to your mind?
Yeah, brilliant question. And I love that you sort of preface this with the idea that different people might reflect on this differently. And certainly so far in human leaders, that's what we've seen. There tends to be variations of what it means to different people. But coming together, there's a few key things that we find at human leaders really kind of define this in a broader extent. So for us, one of the first key components is really authentically understanding yourself. I think as a human being first and a leader second, deeply understanding yourself authentically is the first key. I think the second key for us in human leadership as well is being able to cultivate the empathy to understand others. So again, human beings are obviously a key component in human leadership. So firstly, understanding ourselves, secondly, understanding others. And lastly, for us as a human being and as a leader, again, is taking radical responsibility for ourselves. So at Human Leaders, they're sort of the three core themes or the three core pillars, if you will, that we really use to, I guess, define human leadership in our context.
Really love that. And I love the way that you summarized it into those three areas.
Yeah.
I guess from thinking about the leaders that you work with, is there a particular area, do you think, that they struggle with more?
It's an interesting question. And I think organizationally, what I see as being a key issue for a lot of organizations and leaders is that they want to try and solve organizational issues like, employee engagement, retention, things like that. They're hot topics right now.
Yeah.
And I think we have the misconception that we can solve a lot of these issues by looking outside of ourselves, trying to fix systems, trying to, build team culture and big kind of macro level concepts like this without first having done the work on ourselves as an individual. So I think for a lot of organizations, that's the disconnect that I see, is an unwillingness or perhaps an unknowing that work needs to start with us as a leader at our core first. So really understanding ourselves and taking ownership for the impact we play in those bigger macro sort of level concepts like culture and engagement, etc. So yeah, that's probably the key thing I see happening most.
Yeah, absolutely. I can really resonate with that, Alexis, especially with the clients I work with as well.
Yeah.
Quite often people are put into a leadership role.
Mm.
Technically, they've become really, great at their role. Technically, they've been promoted. They now then acquire that people leadership side. So not necessarily have received the training to be a leader and to actually even know what it feels like um, to lead a team. What are the tools? What are the strategies? What is their
Mm.
vision to be a leader?
Yeah.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head that being able to look within first, we've got to understand, well, who are we? What type of leader are we first and foremost? The more that we
I
can do,
totally
yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Simi. And I think listening to you speak, then kind of two things come to mind for me. Firstly, you touched on this idea that people tend to have the technical or the knowledge background and then transition into leadership positions, and they're perhaps not getting the support they need. And that is a sentiment that's actually backed by the data. I know Deloitte published a study, I think in 2021, that in particular, middle management only get $1 in every 10 invested in them that senior level do. So that's a huge disconnect in actually bringing leaders up to speed. And I think the second thing that I kind of heard you say there was this idea of finding our own innate vision for leadership. And I know in my own personal case, I came into a leadership position. My first leadership position was at Patagonia in Canada, and I had a team of 20 staff. And coming into that role, I felt like there was a prescribed type of leader I needed to be successful. And
mm,
in actual fact, it worked against me being a good leader because I was trying to be something that wasn't authentically myself and didn't
mm,
use my goals and gifts and vision and all those kinds of things that are innately within me. And I was trying to be something I thought was expected of me. And I think that's something that we still see, this kind of vision of what we determine to be a good leader in certain instances. And that actually prohibits us from being an effective leader because we're
yeah.
not actually showing up as our best human selves first.
Absolutely. And what an experience that would have been for you, just reflecting on that experience, Alexis, like how did it make you feel?
Yeah, look, I think it was hugely insightful and it was a very tumultuous period because I think the more I kind of allowed myself to stop trying to be something that I wasn't, the more I felt firstly like the reduction in pressure on myself, and anyone who's trying to be something they're not will feel this internal strife. You feel that
Yeah.
discrepancy within yourself, and it's uncomfortable. So the more I
Yeah.
let go, the better I felt, which was also an uncomfortable transition as well. And the more I found my own authentic voice and my own
Yeah.
authentic style of leadership, and naturally, it for me, I started connecting with staff better, and I started being able to have, better, more open dialogue, and truly foster what felt like closer relationships with my staff because I wasn't trying to be the leader. I was just trying to be the best version of myself, who also
Yeah.
happened to lead other people. And it was, yeah, it was a very transformative process, to be honest. And on a personal
Yeah.
level, I think hugely insightful. And sometimes you have to go through those difficulties of finding what feels right for you before you kind of come into your power in that as well.
Absolutely. And you really hit the nail on the head because at first it's going to feel uncomfortable, just as you
Totally.
described. Because we quite often we want to follow the rule book. We want to follow what's already we've witnessed and seen and experienced before because that's what we know. It feels comfortable, um, but really being able to step into that vulnerability of this is new. This is a
Mm.
new team I'm learning about. I'm not going to get it right straight away, but I'm going to take that time to connect, to really get to know who's in front of me and to connect with those individuals, connect with the team. And I guess as part of that connection, what do you think is really key when you're being a human-centered leader?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few components to that. And certainly within the human leaders framework, we look at that from, again, two places. Firstly, if we want to talk authenticity and building authentic connection, this has to come from a place of knowing ourselves. So, the first key thing that we work on at Human Leaders is understanding yourself. What do you value? What's your vision? What are your patterns and core beliefs that keep you where you are? And perhaps either prohibit you from building, some of those connections that you want to build in your leadership. So I think that's a key thing to dive into first. And I think the second part of that is really beginning to understand empathy and trust at a fundamental level, what that is, what it means to be able to be flexible in your perspective, to actually understand, not just view other people from your shoes, but deeply understand what it might be like to be in your employee's shoes. So you can connect with them, listen to them, communicate with them on their level as well, and create that more open dialogue that is so, fundamentally critical in building connection and building like meaningful relationships, because that's for so many of us why we're at work. It's for meaning, it's for purpose. So relationships is another way we can feel connected to our work, through how we collaborate, connect, and come together as a group as well.
Absolutely. And just to echo that, Alexis, we spend more than, 3/4 of our life at work, working for most of us. And, significantly a good third of our day is spent working. And for many people, it's more than that. But thinking about that, the energy, the connection, the relationships, it's so, so important. That sense of belonging and that sense of we're in this together. I'm part of something that's bigger than just me. And, all of that is hugely important. But as a leader, first and foremost, you've got to be able to identify that for yourself, what that means. And I think, I really love what you say in terms of the first part of that approach is looking within, really getting that understanding for yourself, because we change, we evolve. And those things for us are going to change constantly in terms of how we're showing up, how we want to show up, what we're learning about other people. All of this is information that we're gathering all of the time. And fundamentally, it should be evolving us. So that being that leader is not a position that we kind of get to and that's a destination. It's an evolving process, day in, day out.
Absolutely. And I completely think that this idea of self-compassion is really critical in that as well, because I think when we can cultivate that inwards and towards ourselves, it then allows us the innate ability to have that flexibility in others as well. And certainly something that to, I guess, add to that I recognized in my own self when I took on my leadership role for the first time was how some of my both conscious, but in particular some subconscious beliefs were actually prohibitive in my ability to create that psychological safety for other staff members, because I didn't fully understand how my beliefs were projecting into the dynamic that I was producing around me. And that's just something that, as you said, it's a personal evolution. And as those things started to come to light rather for me as a leader, I begun to realize how some of the behaviors I thought were well-intended were actually being prohibitive to the kind of culture that I was creating. And accepting that that's part of your journey and acknowledging that that is part of the growth journey, and cultivating that self-compassion towards yourself in that is so powerful and so transformative. And as you create that space for yourself to grow authentically and learn about yourself, and that flexibility to change your views and your leadership style, it flows on to the entire culture that you're creating. So I think we complicate things like team culture and all of these sorts of things by going so macro, rather than just saying, how am I impacting this, and how does my beliefs and the way I show up ripple out into how that affects my team and those sorts of things. So I think there's so much power by addressing it at an individual level and creating that space and that transformational space for yourself to grow as a leader, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, the second area, so you said, in terms of the self-awareness piece is really, really key. Moving on to the second area that you promote as part of Human Leaders. Talk to us a little bit more about that in terms of what you see as being the key area that leaders really want more support with in applying that approach.
Yeah, again, I think one of the key things that I have a lot of leaders joining Human Leaders and joining our programs as a result of is not really having the toolkit to understand how they build things like trust. Obviously, psychological safety is a huge concern right now. Things like how that affects things like attrition and employee retention, et cetera. So I think, again, a lot of leaders are looking for support, are looking for language, are looking for tools in understanding that. And again, to come back to it, a lot of the data is telling us the key disconnect is actually understanding, or for leaders to understand how their own leadership capacity at that very basic self-awareness level impacts a lot of that. And again, I think there's just this need or this want to jump too many steps ahead before we do the work on ourselves. And certainly at Human Leaders, one of the key sort of bodies of research that we rely heavily on is that of Dr. Tasha Eurich, who looks at the components of self-awareness and the disconnect between how we view ourselves as leaders and then how that's outwardly projected and the perception others have on that. So I think as we close that gap between our internal and external self-awareness, we start to realize how our behavior impacts on things like communication, it impacts on trust, it impacts on connection, and how we can go about developing our own humility and empathy and self-compassion to really bring that through. So I think really what I witnessed the most is just that disconnect between leaders having the tools and the understanding of their own impact in all of those sorts of areas, but certainly the relationships and how that affects psychological safety, trust, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think the language that is used to describe what leaders do, the language that they use to connect and to engage with their teams, hugely important around creating that safe environment where people feel that it's okay actually for us to speak up. And I think some key questions for leaders to be stopping and asking is, what do my team know that I don't know, that I'm not aware of? What information can they bring to this table that I'm not able to bring? And I think the more as a leader that we can start asking these questions, we then start to look above and beyond ourselves and really tap into the value that the team can bring. And that's then connecting with individuals in terms of, oh, Alexis, I know you've got this amazing strength of being able to connect with the team and find out this insightful information and bring it back. Let's hear more of it. And I think when we can do that as leaders, that's hugely powerful because one, you're recognizing gaps and blind spots that you may have and you're owning those. But secondly, you're then paving a way for others to contribute.
I would completely concur with that, Simi. And that kind of brings us to the final pillar of our human leaders framework, which is this idea of radical responsibility and how, as leaders, it is absolutely our prerogative to take ownership over the team, both good and bad. Because I think there is a mindset shift that still very much needs to happen in a lot of leaders around how we move away from being the knowledge haver or the gatekeeper of information and creating a cultural mindset, if you will, around things like true evolution. Like, what does that mean? What does it actually mean for our team to be curious? How do we actually make space for curiosity? How do we handle mistakes? How do we handle feedback? How do we create learning, true learning communities within our organization? And I think, again, there's just some fundamental gaps around the language we need and fundamentally understanding what these are and how we can create that space for true, curious, brave learning cultures. And it's interesting because a lot of organizations that I've spoken to have things like innovation schemes and all these kinds of things. But if we're fundamentally missing things like trust, psychological safety, the promotion of evolution and curiosity, these are exactly the breeding grounds for innovation. So if we get these fundamentals right, the big stuff takes care of itself. And we're, again, so often focusing on putting processes and systems in place to deal with culture and deal with innovation and deal with things like that. And we're missing the fundamental human element. Our people need to be free to explore, free to make mistakes, free to grow, free to challenge status quo. That's a key in psychological safety. How do we create space for people to challenge and rethink what we think is right? And for leaders, there's a huge piece that is becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, because it isn't comfortable to be challenged or to have to second guess yourself or rethink. And I think we view uncomfortability as something we don't want to go near, but it's actually a beautiful opportunity to totally change how we operate and bring some of
Absolutely.
those bigger picture things like innovation through at a really core level.
Yeah, absolutely. Alexis, let me turn to the chat because we've got a few comments coming through. So Jasmine, welcome. Welcome. So you said, what is the longest word in English language? Smiles, because there is a mile between its first and last. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Fantastic. Absolutely. Smiling, just the engagement, how we show up, makes has a huge impact on those that we're connecting with. Even when I'm coaching leaders in terms of having those courageous conversations,
Mm,
those critical conversations, although some of those messages may be really difficult to deliver,
mm,
and they may not be good news stories. Quite often, they are those difficult, challenging messages that need to be delivered. The way in which we deliver those
yeah,
massively has an impact in the way in which they land.
yeah.
So, really great point there, Jasmine. Thank you so much. Hi to Gurnit, welcome. I'm so pleased to see that you're dialing in from sunny Melbourne. I'm in Melbourne too. Vino, great to see you. Welcome. And we have Huey as well. So, welcome to all of you. I'm so glad that you've joined. I'd love to hear from those of you that are listening, from what Alexis has shared and what we're talking about in terms of human leadership. If there's, one person that you think of, perhaps in your network, or thinking more of leaders globally, like well-known leaders, who comes to your mind when you think of a human-centered leader? Just post it in the chat. Would love to know who comes to your mind when you think of a human-centered leader. Alexis, who comes to your mind?
It's such an interesting question to ask. And I think when I first started looking at this for myself and the people that I was drawn to, there's a few common threads between a lot of them. So the people that I feel tend to appeal to me the most, and certainly I think the research tends to back this up, but those with humility, really, to me, they seem to emanate a real warmth. And because of that humility, they're really dropping that armor. So it allows you to feel like you can actually connect to them on a human level. So some names that come to mind for me is someone like Barack Obama. Even though he's the president of the United States, he just
Mm,
had a real human warmth to him. He carried himself so well, but he never had too much conviction to not be able to challenge his own thinking and rethink, and have that humility to dive into mistakes and try and find better ways of doing things. So for me, that's something that really draws me to other people,
yeah,
is that warmth. And that warmth has to be created through the pathways for us to connect to one another as humans. So again, humility, empathy, being able
yeah.
to see through the veil. And I think for certain industries in particular, and again, my background before working at Patagonia was actually in a corporate marketing space. And I
Mhm.
think in some of those industries that tend to be more numbers games, like a lot of KPI billable hours and things like this, we tend to try and armor ourselves up because there's this innate competition that we're put into against one another in business. And I think that really detracts from our ability to feel a sense of real belonging when we're in direct competition, and in a lot of instances, unhealthy competition with one another. So I think there's a lot of rethinking to be done in some of those spaces around how we create high performance cultures that aren't also devoid of psychological safety and belonging and that connection that we need to feel meaning and purpose in our work.
Yeah, I think part of that meaning and purpose and feeling safe is also feeling comfortable
Mm.
with the concept that we're growing, we're evolving. It's a journey,
Yeah.
and quite often when I'm working with leaders, they put a lot of pressure on themselves that
Mm.
I should know this, I should be there by now. I feel like I should have had this impact by now. And quite often that thinking can stop them from stopping and pausing and thinking, well, okay, I'm not going to get this right all the time.
No.
or there's going to be situations where I can reflect and think, well, what worked well here, what didn't work well. But taking that learning forward each and every time allows you, as you say, Alexis, to be humble. That humility is so key. And also, I think it really taps into the authenticity, because it's really owning that we're all on this journey together. I guess, the pandemic has put all of us, so many leaders, in that situation of the first time they've ever faced something like this, the decisions that they've had to make, the speed of that decision making. A lot of it's just been new. And I think really honing into that kind of space of vulnerability, authenticity, and humility is really key. So I really like what you've shared there. Thank you, Alexis.
Yeah, thank you. And I totally agree with that. And I think when I heard you speak, then there was just like one key message in that, and that is that I think a lot of leaders assume they have to be right. And I think transitioning rather to being right and already having the knowledge, when we can admit that there is opportunity for growth in ourselves, that creates the safety for other people to have that opportunity for growth as well. And I think it just tends to be something I witness so often in leaders, this armoredness around like, well, I have to be the knower. People are looking to me for the answers. And what
Yeah,
happens if I don't have them? And we know that there can be more catastrophic outcomes by not admitting that what we don't know and looking to find the answers than just
yeah,
doubling down on trying to pretend like we do know and then making really bad decisions.
absolutely. So what I'm hearing is, Alexis, to be a human-centered leader, a key part of that is to de-armor. We need
Absolutely.
to de-armor ourselves. We need to be focusing on the human connection, really just the basics of looking to build trust, looking to build connection. I always say that as humans, we have this really sharpened detection, sniffing out when someone is not being real with us and not being straight. I think it's so important because that sense is on, that alert mode is on for us all of the time. So the more that we can just de-armor, really focus on connection, really focus on being our true selves, you're right, it absolutely is liberating for us, but also it's liberating for those around us, the teams that we lead and the individuals that we lead, because at the end of the day, we're growing, they're growing. There's space for error, there's space for things to not go quite to plan, and that's okay, because life's like that.
Absolutely, Simi. And I think, it has a flow on. And I remember reading a study. It might have been posted in either Adam Grant's book, or actually, no, I think it was from Katie Milkman in How to Change. And they looked at this study that basically assessed error making in hospital services. And the outcome was that they wanted to understand how to prevent more errors in hospitals that may or may not lead to fatal mistakes. And the cultures that actually were able to overcome this were the ones that made the most errors, which in the first instance you would say, well, that's not a good hospital, they're making so many errors. But what they actually uncovered was that there were many hospitals actually just hiding the amount of errors that they made, and they had a culture of covering up errors, which in actuality led to more patient fatalities and mishaps, because there was a really ingrained culture of reprimand and mistakes being really harshly punished. So rather than create that culture of trust and learning, basically they exacerbated the issue by not allowing the space to learn from mistakes. So I think when we, again, at our level, at our individual capacity as a leader, understand fundamentally what it looks like to build trust, fundamentally what it feels like to be in curiosity, to be in learning culture, to be in actual trust with one another, and not faux trust, not telling your staff, you can come to me with anything. We have a culture of open door policy and this and that. No, we have to model trust by being ourselves and creating that space. And we will, again, naturally see some of these things like errors reducing and productivity improving, because people can just show up as themselves and focus on that and not have the anxiety associated with being all the other things that they're not.
Absolutely. And Alexis, thank you so much, because it really, we could keep talking about this topic for so long. I know you and I can keep talking and talking. It's so dear to our hearts. It's very at the forefront of the work that both of us do with the clients and the organizations that we work with. I really admire you and the impact that you're having. I really wanted to also shout out with the big congratulations around your LinkedIn recognition of being the top 20 voice on LinkedIn in 2022. Fantastic, and you're doing some great things with human leaders. So it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you and have you here today. I'm sure there's going to be many opportunities for us to connect again, and it'd be great to have you back on, Alexis.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for providing the platform to have my voice heard and have my ideas and my thoughts and my life mission on show for others to connect with. I really appreciate the invitation to be here.
Amazing. And thank you to everyone else who's joined as well. Jasmine, Gernit, Vino, Huey, Deborah, and all of the others that have joined or maybe listening into the replay. The whole purpose of Wellbeing Faces Lives is to be sharing insights, practical strategies, and having some really good discussion around what leadership really is, and on a practical level, how can we elevate our own performance as leaders and equip and support each other's. It's a great community to be part of. Please feel free to reach out to myself and connect with the Wellbeing Face community as well. Love to have you as part of that. And again, thank you so much for joining as well. Really good to see you all. Alexis, again, huge pleasure to have you here. And I look forward for us connecting again very soon. I wish you all well and have a great rest of the day.